Okay, in this video, I want to describe the different types of mistakes that we actually can make when we're doing a hypothesis test. So these are what are called type 1 and type 2 errors. And so when we've been interpreting the results of our test by comparing the p-value to the significance level, we've been kind of careful with the language that we choose. We don't say that we can definitely reject this and without a doubt we know this claim is true. We say that we have evidence to suggest one thing is true or maybe not true. And so even if we do all of the math correctly, sometimes we just pick a sample, which maybe even if we pick it randomly, which is not representative of the population, which has some bias, and then we might make a wrong conclusion. And there are two ways that this can go. So just recall that when you're doing a hypothesis test, we're going to make our decision by comparing the p-value to the significance level, which is denoted with alpha. And so as long as our p-value is less than or equal to that significance level, then one result that we hope to get is that we can reject the null hypothesis and we have evidence to support the claim in HA. Okay, again, we don't say without a doubt HA is true, we just have gathered enough evidence to claim that that is more likely to be true. If the p-value is bigger than alpha, this is a case where the test is statistically insignificant. And in those cases, we don't accept the null hypothesis, rather we fail to reject the null hypothesis. So that's a slightly weaker statement. And so we don't reject HO, we don't say that HO is true. This would be the situation where the test is actually inconclusive. So let's think about what could go wrong with a hypothesis test. So one error that we could make is what's called a type 1 error. And this occurs when we incorrectly reject HO, when in fact it is true. So maybe in the previous example where we were looking at the swimsuit, we had significant sample that we were able to claim that we can reject the null hypothesis. But maybe we just got a misleading sample of people, and that could have been wrong. So a type 1 error would be summarizing the situation when we have a false positive, right? We think that the test is significant, but in fact it's not. So we rejected the null hypothesis when in fact it was true. So a type 1 error is a false positive. It's when we reject the null hypothesis when in fact the null hypothesis is true. And the other is going to address the inconclusive result when we incorrectly conclude that a test is inconclusive. That seemed like a strange statement. So let's say that another way. A type 2 error occurs when we incorrectly fail to reject HO when in fact it is false and we should have rejected it. So this would be the situation where we get a negative test result, meaning we get something which is not significant, but in fact we should have gotten a significant test because the null hypothesis is not correct. And so to state these in more practical terms, if we're thinking about the judicial system in the United States, then for a jury, say of 12 people to convict somebody, they need to have enough evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. So in some cases, a jury might think that they have insane amounts of evidence and they might falsely convict an innocent person. So that would be a type 1 error of a false positive. A type 2 error would be when a jury fails to convict somebody who is indeed guilty. So that would be the false negative. And here's a nice little cartoon to illustrate this. So you've got a little doctor over here. He's seeing a male patient, and he's telling the male patient that they're pregnant. So this would be a false positive test result. This guy is not pregnant, but his doctor is incorrectly telling him that he is. And here's a little picture of a type 2 error where you've got this doctor who's evaluating this woman who seems really clearly to be pregnant, but she's telling this woman incorrectly, you got a negative test result, you are not pregnant, when in fact she is. So that's a quick synopsis of type 1 and type 2 errors.